everybody, and welcome to this exclusive conversation with VR expert and founder of Arthur Technologies, Christoph Fleischmann. My name is Abby Guthkelch, and I'm the Global Head of Executive Engagement for Meta's Reality Labs team. And I'll be putting the hard questions to Chris in just a moment. But before I launch into it, I just want to take a couple of moments to lay the foundations for our conversation. In the last 18 months, there's been a lot of talk about the metaverse, and especially about what it might mean for the future of work. But we're not here to just talk about the future. We're actually here today to talk about a technology that is already changing the way that businesses work today. And that technology, of course, is virtual reality. Virtual reality is having a huge impact on the way companies approach meetings and collaboration, helping teams feel more connected to each other, even if they can't physically be present in the same room, the same building, or even the same country. There's nobody better I can think of that's better placed to tell us more about the way that VR is transforming the way that companies can come together than Chris. So let's get into it. Chris, thank you so much for joining us today. It's such a pleasure to have you with us. Now, before we get into talking about VR and the impact that it can have for businesses, I'd love to hear a little bit more about you, your background, how you got into the VR space, and what led to you creating Arthur.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be here, Abby. Thank you. So I actually go now 10 years back to augmented reality. That was my first touch point with the technology. But way before that, I was already super interested in new technologies and software. So in the 2000s, when I was trying to code and work on, back then, the internet was there, and there were software startups, and there were all of these new technologies, and we had some ways of communicating globally through video conferences. There was really this magical moment where I wanted to get deeper into this tech. But for me personally, it was actually quite tough. I come from the south of Austria, and if you know the region, it's beautiful. We have wonderful mountains and beautiful lakes, but it wasn't really a software development hub. Mm-hmm. And so I personally love to work with people in the same room, but it was incredibly hard to find anyone. And even with the internet at my disposal, I really still felt quite far away from other folks. This idea that the internet made the world a small place didn't really translate so much for me. And I was almost a little bit mad how everybody was saying, oh, it's changing so much, because I felt almost like a tourist. That really changed then in 2013 when I was working at a company that is now part of Qualcomm. And it was a super simple augmented reality demo on one of these very, very early headsets. It was just this cube that was spinning in 3D in front of you. And I remember that this was kind of this aha moment for myself, where it's like, okay, all what I felt, this isolation, maybe doesn't have to be there. There's this technology where we might be able to create something where you and I really feel like we're working in the same room together. And that was basically my journey into this technology.
That's wonderful. I love the way that you've really sort of positioned that, and your light bulb moment. I think we really see that when people get into the technology. Until you actually start to experience it, you don't really sort of understand how it can transform. So you've been in the VR landscape, AR landscape for a while. What's changed over the last sort of 5 years?
Oh my God, so much. I think my highlight over the last 5 years is this transition from VR as a kind of niche gaming and entertainment technology to this computing platform. And I think if you were in the scene, you always thought of it as something that eventually displaces traditional screens. But the general public would mainly see the use cases around entertainment. And that changed the last 5 years with better and better hardware, with more and more knowledge and more sophisticated software. We see how this is just an entirely different way how you can communicate with anything digital.
Yeah.
And that is changing in our conversations with clients, in how we see the market readiness and also the technology readiness. Everything is gearing towards VR as a computing platform rather than this niche entertainment vehicle.
I mean, it's fairly obvious. I can see that, you know, you're very passionate in this space. It excites you. You've built a business around it. But when you're talking to business leaders about the potential of VR today, what is it that sort of like really excites you about those conversations?
I think it's the maturity and sophistication of the conversations we have now versus 3 years ago versus 5 years ago. So 5 years ago, it was fun because everything was so new and everybody was, you know, just...
A gimmick.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, fun for a second, but then you think about, okay, how do you actually build a business around a gimmick? And so I think there is a lot of understanding now that the nature of work has changed. We are trying to figure out, you know, as humanity, how we're going to work together in the future. I would argue that humans already are the bottleneck in a lot of companies around collaboration, communication, analysis, strategy. And it's just going to become even more and more painful. Now, we've done 3 years of experiment with working from home, which I completely support because I don't like waste. I think it's borderline barbaric to make people, you know, sit in a car for an hour or two to drive into an office to then anyways be on video calls with another office. But at the same time, there's a good reason why we're having this return to the office, because the current technologies that we're using don't really have the bandwidth to get it done. And this resonates in these conversations. Leaders in companies are trying to understand how do I build the workforce of tomorrow? How do I engage people entering the labor force? But how to make sure that not everything becomes a silo. As we're returning back to the office, we're returning back to silos, which was a huge problem in organizational velocity and efficiency. So for me, we have two choices. Either we go back to silos and waste, or we pave the way for this new technology, which can actually very much fix this on a fundamental level.
I couldn't agree more. I think, you know, it's not just about having the right technology, it's about the mindset, it's about the culture that you basically bring into your business. Now, you mentioned a couple of myths that are out there, that VR is just for gaming. There's the other sort of myth around it only being for the younger generation of workers.
Yeah.
You know, that it's a passing fad. What do you think the biggest myths are that need to be bust when it comes to VR for work?
I think you've hit on probably some of the most important ones that need to get out of the way, ideally early in conversations. It's not just about gaming, it's not just about entertaining, it's about a different interface you have to the digital world.
Yep.
An interface where humans can actually catch up with everything that is happening in this magical world of bits and bytes. And at the same time, it's an interface to each other. So it's human to human and human machine communication that gets accelerated. I think next to this, one of the big myths that I think exist in how enterprises try to adopt this is this idea that it immediately displaces everything or nothing. Mm-hmm. And this is also wrong. That's not how new technologies work. New technologies, if you follow the logic of disruptive technologies, they'll have some disadvantages at the beginning, and they'll have some advantages that were never in existence before. So naturally, you will not see this technology broadly change all of your work life, but it will change in an incredibly pronounced way some parts at the beginning. And as the technology gets better, as the headsets get better, as solutions like ours get better and more integrated, this paves the way for them to displace screens completely. But it's this way of thinking, whether it's a horizontal adoption mm-hmm. or a vertical adoption, if you want to phrase it this way. You will maybe only have 5 use cases at the beginning, but these 5 will be amazing, and they will transform your business. They will give you an incredible amount of ROI. And I think that's one of the myths I try to work with because people are quick to judge, right? They look at it and then you try it out, and then one meeting that is perfectly fine right now to hold in a video conference, maybe it doesn't make sense to do in VR, and that's okay. That's part of how this technology gets adopted.
I love that. We're starting to move into use case sort of territory, which is great, because I want to come on to talk about like the impact of VR within business. So you've touched on it a little bit, but if I could just ask you to sort of like go a bit deeper on it, which is why do you think there is this opportunity for businesses to change the way that they approach meetings and collaboration? And why is VR the right technology for them?
Yeah, so in very, very simple terms, our pitch is we want to be your office space of the future. If you're a big company, we want to be this gap that has developed, that probably was always there, but has developed very, very tangibly in the last 3 years, where you feel like you don't really have this proper grasp on your people. Maybe your workforce is turning, maybe this sounds a little bit facetious, but almost into mercenaries. They don't really feel connected to your company or towards each other anymore. And again, you have hired globally, you want to hire globally, you can't get everyone into the same room. So this is really where we come in and we say, okay, we want to provide you with a platform where you can deploy different meeting types in your organization that are in 3D, where you have this full bandwidth of communication and collaborative potential. And it's simple things like the spatial audio, right? If you and I are in VR together, it just feels more natural that you might be standing in front of me, maybe you have 3 colleagues standing over in a different part of the room, and they can have a conversation as well. And just this, if you show this to business leaders, there's immediately this light bulb moment, because you don't get this anywhere in the flat digital world.
Yep.
Everything is kind of single threaded. I share my screen, I talk, everybody else listens. And I don't know, for the love of me, I have never been in a 10 people video conference and thought this wasn't a huge waste of amazing people's time. Not because the person talking wasn't doing a great job, just because the medium can't convert all of the potential that you have into output. Meanwhile, in VR, starting with the audio itself, that it's so natural to quickly step aside, have a side chat, but also that everybody can be active at the same time. Just like if you go back to these concepts of in-person workshops, they are so wonderful, first of all, of course, because we feel in person, we feel present, but also because we can spread out content in the room spatially. And this is exactly these paradigms we're bringing into VR, and they're driving true business value. And they will eventually be the components that solve how companies can design their future workforce.
There's been so many conversations that I've had with executives over the last few years, which has been, well, but the 2D video conferencing is good enough and it can get everyone on the screen together. And when you put it side by side next to an Arthur meeting, so you start in video and then move across, you suddenly go from everyone being on mute, right, and just staring at the sort of screen at each other, and then moving them into Arthur, into an immersive environment, and suddenly everyone's able to really connect, and like you say, exactly, this aha moment that really sort of like comes through.
Yeah, it's incredibly powerful to be in this meeting and realize that, of course, to some extent, it's still early in the technology, right? We're not at sunglasses yet, and there's a lot of things that are lacking in terms of integrations and stuff like this, which is natural. But it's these fundamentally simple things that change your experience, and where you immediately see, okay, this is something we need to invest in, because other companies will invest in it, and over the next years, this will never become less powerful, right?
Yeah.
This will only grow exponentially in power.
So let's come on to some specifics. We've been talking very much, about what the technology can do, but can you give us some examples of clients that you're working with who have really felt that impact that VR can have within their businesses?
Absolutely. So I think in broad strokes, you have training-oriented use cases that can range from your onboarding of new recruits to soft skills training, which works really, really, really well in a VR environment and also in Arthur. And the great thing about this is you don't need much to get started. You need a great instructor. You need to set up this room. It's a little bit like building a presentation, a slide, just in 3D, right?
Yeah.
How you set up these spaces, and then you bring people in and you guide them through this experience. So we will release in the next couple months a wonderful case study with an automotive company that has been working very hard with us on bringing their onboarding program to Arthur with incredible results. Like 100% of people say they want their next onboarding or in VR, and this should be expanded. And 100% are saying that this is way more fun and engaging, and like incredible results, especially if you compare it to video conferences. Next to training, we also look at workshops and kind of agile meetings. So if you're a software team and you're working together, we have another company we're working with there very closely that is deploying really large-scale planning meetings in VR. So if you're a large organization and you have 200 developers and product managers and project managers on something, it becomes this huge mess to ensure that everybody is working on the right things. And in VR, we can structure a meeting, create this place where everybody gets together and we can actually visualize all of this information and let these sub-teams share their ideas and basically define the strategy for this entire department for the next couple months. So there are some use cases we've done it. We've done this actually with a public client, PwC, and the German government have actually done what's called a PI planning. It's one of these types of meetings, and it was incredibly successful where people, you would usually book this huge room with, it's this incredible, it's almost like a festival that you have to do for your software team to come together, and then for these teams to end up doing very, very kind of detailed work on what they need to do. And so we've shown that this was incredibly efficient. And beyond that, anecdotally, what we're also seeing now is just virtual co-working. Yeah. I find this really interesting now. If you bring your screen into Arthur, I can actually sit next to you. And our company, we're 60 people, but we're spread around the globe. And we now sit 3 times a week for an hour in the office next to each other with our avatars. And I can just basically tap someone on the shoulder and turn my screen and say, hey, can you give me input on that? And probably every hour there saves 4 hours of meetings. So those are the kind of components we're looking at. Training, deeper workshops and collaboration, and then more ad hoc, natural, serendipitous collaboration.
Fantastic. So many great examples in there. And some of the organisations that you've named and the ones still to come, obviously ROI is a big thing for these organisations. Right. Investing in this technology, investing in this space, you need to see the return on investment. So how can companies, you've touched on it a little bit, but just qualify or quantify the impact that VR is having, that they can then turn around and get more investment to expand that out?
Yeah, and I think that's a critical conversation, because of course your ROI today is not your ROI in 6 months, it's not your ROI in 3 years on this. But our approach as a startup is, we can't sell the future, we need to sell something right now that immediately gives you a business benefit. So what we try to do is structure the ROI conversation to understand, are we replacing physical meetings? Because that's easy, right? If you had a meeting where you had to fly everyone in, or everybody has to drive to an office, you immediately see how much effort goes into bringing these people together. And we can show in our surveys that it's for some meetings where the emotional connection is the most important part, we would not recommend it. But many meetings are not like this. Many meetings are a bunch of people to fly in together to put Post-its on a wall because it's more engaging. Now here we can benchmark it against flights saved, against all of the costs, ecological, economical, but also just the pressure we put on people to travel. The second thing is to benchmark it against video conferences. And there we look at, how much more engaged do you feel? How much better do you retain the information that you have in video conferences? And that's, of course, partly qualitative, because it's not like you're saving a flight over a video conference, but the meeting is better. Yeah. So the overall results of this team working together need to become better. So we're trying to track project velocity, for example. How long does it take you to make an important decision? That's something where usually, even if you deploy video conferences, you end up having an in-person meeting at one point and schedule important milestones around these in-person meetings. And if you take that out, suddenly you're 10 times faster. I think that's really interesting. Of course, we're still working through the data here and collecting as we speak, but I think maybe velocity is going to be the highest driver of ROI. You're just, as a big organization, nobody thinks they can, or I think everybody thinks they can be agile, but I think there's a lot of voices that would say it's impossible to be agile if you have more than 100 people or so. I think this technology can actually provide agility, true agility to these teams. The third category is, of course, the most complicated one to understand ROI, in where we neither replace physical meetings nor video conferences, but we're doing something new that wasn't there. There wasn't maybe even a pain that they felt before. So we've done this, for example, with a large investment bank. Coming back to silos, right? Some meetings just never happened in this investment bank before because there was no way to have this forum of communication between their experts in, for example, 2 different geographies. And now that's a little bit harder to track how this translates to ROI, because that's a very fundamental thing that you're solving. So those are the 3 different areas where we track ROI.
I just love the fact that all the industries that you've referenced, I'm sure a lot of people like watching this will be like not expecting those particular industries to have, come into this space.
Oh yeah, true.
It's investment banking, it's government, it's consulting services, etc. on that side. So trying to get through to this wider application, this wider take up of VR within all industries, verticals, sort of like really being able to sort of see it as something that will enhance their business. What do you think, or how close are we to actually achieving that?
I think I don't believe in singular inflection points. I think as with other technologies, this is this gradual ramp up where just the speed of adoption accelerates exponentially. I think we're much further than most of the public things. If I look at the type of use cases that we have, as you mentioned, can be pharma, can be investment banking, can be professional services, government, energy. So we have clients across all of these different industries. And also, if you look at the types of teams that are working with us there, it's not just the innovation teams that are tasked with that. Some of the best users we have are completely unrelated. Sometimes teams that have nothing to do with digital workplace, collaboration, or anything, that just say, hey, we have a problem in terms of communication and collaboration, and we want to solve this. So I think we are, of course, always tracking closely what the next generation of headsets will bring. And with every generation, we see a material shift. We also think that it just takes a bit of time for these enterprises to build these new ways, this change management that is happening. So I think we're going to see a continuous accelerated adoption the next 2 years, where some of the use cases that we see right now already working, we'll just scale them. And I think that is going to be the interesting difference, that we've proven now that it can work, and we're going now into conversations how to scale them up. And this is when you really see large-scale adoption happening.
We're starting to move into the future, so we're going to sort of like spend the sort of like the last part. We are running out of time. I can't believe how quickly it always goes when you start having fascinating conversations. So thank you. But when you are thinking about the experiences that you've had seeing businesses, transform the way that they work with VR. What are the 3 key insights or advice that you would give to business leaders that they need to know to get started?
I think there are amazing creative people at every Fortune 500 company, at every Forbes Global 2000 company. And all they need is backing from the top. I think that's the single best thing that leadership can do in these organizations, support these creative people. Because this technology, that's not a recipe for a muffin. You can't just put 3 things together and it works in your organization. Yet. Exactly. It takes this combination of, a software team like us, a team internally, and then the end users to really figure out the equation, how this transforms the organization. So backing from the top is important. I think the second one is it's perfectly okay to try and fail. You're going to roll out use cases where you say, okay, technology is not yet there. And you're going to roll out use cases where like, how have we not been doing this for 5 years already? And this third thing is stay close to the technology. It's fast evolving. And of course, enterprises, they have their own cycles of making decisions and so on. So you need to figure out a path how you can stay on top of the technology. Because just last year, with mixed reality on the Quest Pro, I think the game already changed again so much.
Yeah.
And it's driving so many great new ways of how you can work together. So if you don't have a method internally where you can have these conversations, these relationships with headset manufacturers, with the software to really stay in the loop what's happening, you might actually be an early mover, but kind of then fall a little bit behind almost. So those are the 3 things I would recommend.
You touched briefly on MR, and it's the next sort of like shift. We've talked about sort of the sort of metaverse, but if we go back and sort of like think about big computing or tech shifts over the last few decades, of course you've got the rise of desktop computing, the creation of the internet, mobile phones, the mobile internet, etc., coming through. When you think of VR within those terms, how big is the opportunity?
Oh, I think it's much bigger than mobile. It is, for me, as big as computing and the internet. Ultimately, you have to think about what... I try to go back to these first principles, like what does it actually do? It's a different window to the digital world. And as we talked about before, we as humans are trying to catch up with what is happening in the digital world with AI and all of the data and information, all of these processes. So I think there's more than ever now, if you try out one of the cutting edge MR or VR headsets, you can immediately see that a lot of the principles are now defined, how we as humans will be able to engage with digital content there. So it's this idea that it displaces screens is, I think, much, much more palpable now. You can really see, you can bring in your screen. Those are, quote unquote, it's called, I think, skeuomorphic design, where we bring in kind of paradigms from the real world into a new technology to make it easier for us to think about it. But it's such an easy example to look at it and say, wow, I can just draw a tablet like this, and I'll have a tablet here physically in the room. So I think it's as big as the internet. I think it's going to be the only way how we as humans can truly unlock human-to-human and human-machine communication and collaboration. And I think it has the potential to have incredibly positive effects on the world. Because we're still subject to so much of geographical limitation in the world. It still matters so much where you are, where you live, where you were born. And it's something we don't really think about until we've changed it, and then we look at, into the past and we're like, how did we live like this? And that's why it's such a big deal.
I can't believe that's it. That's all we've got time for today, Chris. It's been absolutely wonderful talking to you. An enormous thank you from me, from the team, for sharing so many great insights into the impact that VR is having in business today and where it can extend into the future. But also a massive thank you to everyone who's taken the time to listen in today. I hope we've inspired you to want to explore more about what VR can do for work. If you do want to know more about VR for work, please head over to forwork.meta.com, where you can check out our range of MetaQuest VR headsets, learn more about VR solutions, or easily schedule a call with one of our experts. And of course, if you want to learn more about Arthur and what Chris and the team are up to, please head over to arthur.digital. Now, that's all from us, sadly, today, but thank you so much for joining us. Thank you again, Chris, and see you next time.